Come on in, come on in. How are you doing today? Welcome to the store. Yes, this is the Dungeons and Dragons store. We're available all over the world. We are very, very popular. So, how can I help you today? Okay, so your group is thinking about starting Dungeons and Dragons. You have some friends who are really interested in it, and you just have no idea what you're doing, and you're sort of here to learn a little bit, and potentially see if it's for you. Okay, well, let's say that you're committing to something that is much bigger than you might anticipate. It is definitely a time commitment, emotional commitment. It is not something to really enter willy-nilly, but if you're ready for it, it can be very fun. Oh, absolutely. I can totally help you with creating your character or whatever it is that you need. I can just go through the basics with you first. Is that something you would be interested in? Okay, yeah. So let's see here. Let's just go over some of the basics. Do you even know what Dungeons and Dragons is? Okay. It's a TTRPG. Do you know what that is? Okay. Well, if you know anything about TTRPGs or people who play them, they love acronyms. So TTRPG means tabletop role-playing game, and tabletop role-playing game is basically only makes sense to people who have heard the term before, so it's not very descriptive. How I will describe it to you is it is a board game without a board, or a card game without cards, and all you really need is the information. All you really need is information and yourself and creativity with your friends. Yeah, it's just a game. It has a lot of rules, but what I will say, one of the basics of D&D is that the rules only exist to facilitate fun. So long as you are having fun with a rule, it can exist. But as soon as people are not having fun with it, and as a group you are all not jiving with something, you can get rid of it. No one's going to stop you. This is not a video game where there's a code that stops you from doing something. This is not a board game where it breaks as soon as you try to tweak things, right? Or the balance gets all messed up. Instead, this is a game where it's all about telling a story with your friends, okay? And you really only need 2 people. One person's going to be facilitating the story, sort of like the narrator. They're going to play every character that you or other players are not going to be playing. You, on the other hand, I assume you're going to be just a player if it's your first time. You, as a player, will be playing one character. This is a character of your choosing. You make them from scratch. It can be very intimidating, but trust me, it is really not that complicated. You just have to think about many, many different things and combine them into a very unique character that, will impress all of your friends. And you just have to make sure that they are absolutely perfect and that they have their own flaws and they basically have their own lives. And you want to really think about them more than you think about yourself. And that way you can channel all of your energy and personal problems into this character. And that way you feel like you as a person do not have those same problems because, it's not you that has those problems. It's this other character that has those problems. So, obviously, and then when if your group ever talks to you about it and they're suddenly like, hey, we're feeling a little bit uncomfortable because you're sort of bringing a lot of personal feelings into your character and sort of working through something, maybe you should talk to a therapist. You should adamantly deny it and say, no, this is just my character. I'm totally fine. Listen, just because my character wants to do all these horrible things to other people and to themselves doesn't necessarily mean that I want to do those things. But that's neither here nor there. If we are to talk about what else you need to know about Dungeons and Dragons, you need to know that there are stats. Stats they're not statistics, okay? They're basically just numbers assigned to different traits of a human being, right? Strength, dexterity, intelligence, wisdom, charisma, constitution. Those are your basic stats, and you'll get assigned a number, and that number basically means how good or how bad you are at that certain thing, okay? Now, I don't think you should worry too much about stats. I'll help you with it. I'll get all these things down for you. But to be honest, stats really only tie you down. It can be a really good guideline for how you play your character. Say you have a very high dexterity character, you can then like make the presumption that they're very good at being sneaky. They're very good at sort of like being, they're very dexterous, right? So they can do a lot of like little tricks, or they can like move their body in very interesting ways. That can be very interesting, right? But what is more interesting is, and the rolls that you make, because you are going to have to use dice. The rolls will be based off of those things. But I do think that there is a lot of room, especially depending on your group, to play your character in a way that doesn't necessarily care about the stats. So I wouldn't really worry too much about it. Okay, so with that, the last thing we need to talk about, the last thing before we move on to different classes and starting with your character, is this. These are dice. Now, do not be worried. Do not be afraid. This is, you know what this is, right? This is just a regular dice, 6-sided dice. I know it's very frightening, the sound of many different dice clanking together. It feels, salacious, right? What I would say, I get a lot of people coming in here, and I will say this. The dice is not that complicated. I don't know why people get really confused about it. You just have to remember that you have a D4, and then you have a D6, D8, D10, D12, D20, D100. You have a decimal die as well. You also have very specialty die, like this one over here. It's a 6-sided die, but it's a plus and minus die. That is for the fate system. You're not going to be touching that today, but it's just something for you to understand that it's really not that complicated, okay? So just a D4, D6, D8, D10, D12, and a D20, as well as a D100, right? So just remember that. And if you want to buy some dice, absolutely. We sell a lot of dice. Basically, half of the economy of Dungeons & Dragons is people being obsessed with shiny new dice. But there are a few things that I would warn about. One, dice can be very, very expensive, especially if you're coming to us for a specialty store here. So we're going to, of course, sell, you could either get $200 groceries for a couple of weeks, or you could buy a set of dice, and even then the set of dice is going to like enamor you just for a little bit of time, and then you'll get bored of it and want to buy more. So I do think it's worth the money though, just saying. But the other thing that you need to keep in mind is that a lot of dice are resin-based dice, and resin in particular, it doesn't degrade very well. It's not very good for the environment, and so if you're at all environmental conscious, I would then go to an even more specialty store that maybe has like environmentally friendly dice, but then that will cost you a pretty penny as well. So just something to keep in mind. And with that, let's go over the classes, okay? It's going to be a little bit of a rapid fire here, but let's start off with the barbarian. A barbarian, as the name implies, very angry. Angry, angry, angry. That is the defining trait of a barbarian when you get into a fight, because there's going to be a lot of fighting in Dungeons & Dragons. I don't know if I mentioned that. A lot of fighting in Dungeons & Dragons. And a barbarian basically wields a weapon and gets really angry, and because of that anger literally shields them from damage. So there are certain things about classes that you are not going to be able to sort of get away from, right? For a barbarian, it's going into a rage. You're going to have to either play or figure out or imagine your character going into like a flying rage every time they're in combat. If you pick the barbarian class. So these are things that will help you determine what kind of character you're playing, right? So barbarian is first. I personally do enjoy a good barbarian. They can be pretty simple, but I will definitely not go too much into it. So next, of course, we have the bard. Bards are let's say they're the very charismatic ones of the group. Really, when you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, you have the fighting and the non-fighting. And when you're not fighting, bards can be very handy because they're very charismatic. And so whenever you have to talk to people and you're trying to sort of get information or you're trying to hold a conversation, sometimes you'll have to roll. And rolling in a conversation can use, a lot of the time will use your charisma. I would suggest for bards, because as a bard, you will be singing, you will be helping your teammates, you're basically a cheerleader. But if you're in a small group, which it sounds like you're going to be in a small group, you guys maybe are like kind of new, I would say that a bard is not a very good class to start out with because it's sort of geared towards having a larger group of people. Now, if I use the term party, listen, we're not bringing out the vodka here. I mean, you could, but party basically means the group of players that are in your little adventuring team, right? So you'll likely have, like, say if you have a barbarian and like a few other people, right? That will be your party. And a bard tends to be viewed as the fourth or fifth party member. You add them later, you add them as if you have a lot of people, but it's not one of the first ones you go to because they're a jack of all trades, master of none sort of situation is what I'll say. But they can be very fun. And honestly, I wouldn't even worry about something like that. It's just that if the person that is going to be running your group, if they're by the book rules, like a rule follower, then you might run into issues with bard. But otherwise, you probably will be fine. Next, we have the cleric. Clerics are very fun. So first of all, clerics are a much nicer, better version of like priests in our real world, right? Like priests in our real world, they can be a little problematic. Let's just say that. But clerics are basically very heavily armored healers. But they also deal a lot of damage. Basically, they're religious, right? So if you want to play like a religious fanatic, go ahead and play a cleric. What I will say is that just because you're not religious in real life doesn't necessarily mean that you can't play a cleric, because being a cleric and sort of playing someone who is sort of really devoted to a god, and gods in Dungeons and Dragons, which, okay, let's talk a second. Dungeons and Dragons comes with its own world, but a lot of people will create their own worlds and use Dungeons and Dragons as a way to convey that world, right? So clerics can be a bit confusing to a new player because now they have to delve into, well, what god do I follow? There's like a gajillion of them, and they all sound cool or weird or honestly just like a jumble of syllables. So what I will say is, if you do not feel comfortable with your dungeon master, with your game master, the person that's going to be running the game, if you don't feel comfortable talking to them right off the bat, right? Like maybe you're good friends, but this is not a topic that you would like really talk to them about very much, or you don't have the relationship with them yet. I would say that if you are a little bit anxious and you don't want to talk to them about it, I wouldn't go with cleric. But if you want to take this opportunity to sort of try and get to know them better or to talk to them, then being a cleric will be good because you'll be able to engage with them in that sort of conversation. Into like, what god, like, hey, can you recommend some gods that I would follow? Or, I'm trying to play this kind of character and I want to be a cleric. What kind of like god do you think I should follow? Or you could even try and come up with your own god, right? That's always very fun because again, there's no real rules. It's you guys are just having fun and playing a game together and just sort of making believe, right? It's basically a giant game of make believe for adults. Okay, so next we have Druid. Druid is similar to Cleric, is that they're very supportive. They can heal, but they're all about plants. They're all about plants, forest, magic, and they can turn into animals. Now, Druid is a little bit more complicated. They can shape shift, but they can also cast magic. And something that I would definitely recommend with Druid is, unless you are particularly interested in the plant aspect of it, druids can feel like, what's the word? They can feel pigeonholed into a particular character type. So I'm not saying not to play druid. I actually think druids are very fun, especially when you don't know the system very well, because a lot of people get bogged down by like, oh, this is going to do the most damage or whatever. That doesn't matter. It really doesn't. Druids are very fun, but they can feel a bit complicated, right? Because they have so many different systems. So if you're really interested in, and I totally understand this, like if you're a cottagecore girly, a druid can be very good. And, you know, there's many different ways to play a druid. Next, of course, you have a fighter. The stereotype here is that fighters are very boring. You know, I think fighters get a bad rap because, you know, a fighter is a blank slate. You're just a person that learned how to fight. You know, you either had like a teacher, you learned how to fight with a sword, a bow, whatever. One of the things about fighter that I find very interesting is that because it's such a blank slate, you can take it anywhere. You're not bound by a sort of very specific character, like class trait. Like a barbarian has to have some form of like rage, not issue, but like flaw, right? Like you kind of have to be quick to anger in some capacity because you're going to be angry a lot of the time. Clerics need to be religious, right? Or like druids need to have a relationship with nature in some capacity, or a relationship with animals. Fighter is one of those things where you just need to know how to fight. So it gives you a lot of creative freedom. But for someone like you who is new, I would actually go against the grain and say that fighter is not a good recommendation because it can feel boring. It can feel like you have so many options, you don't know where to go. So that is fighter. Then you have monk. Monk is exactly what it sounds like. It is sort of inspired by sort of Eastern culture, and you are basically you're basically a fighter, but you have no weapon. But you know how to fight with your hands and your feet, and they can be very, very fun. But only if you really lean into it. You know, I think that monks. I don't know. Monks, I personally really love monks, but I get this weird feeling whenever I think about the aesthetic of a monk where I'm like, this is not really I don't know how, you know, I don't really know what I'm trying to say. So you can ignore me on that. Monks are great. If you want to play a monk, you can play a monk. But, just keep in mind that monks are just like hands and feet kind of character. Think of okay, this is going to be a really deep cut. Remember, if you recall, in the fantastic Scooby-Doo movie, the live action movie, Daphne learns how to fight, right? And she learns how to fight in sort of like a kung fu kind of way. And at the end, she sort of like fights her way against this really big guy and like kicks him off in like this really cool way. She's basically a monk at that moment, right? So if you want to be that kind of character, if you want to be sort of live action Daphne, then you could go monk. So monk can go in very different directions, and you can sort of take on the aesthetics of like monk, or you can also not, right? And you can just take it a very different direction. Next up, we have paladin. Paladins are very restrictive because they not only restrict you on how you fight, but it's also, you have to take a vow. Every paladin, what makes a paladin is you're basically taking a vow of some kind, and that's what gives you your powers. So you're basically like an upgraded fighter. It's if you think of a cleric and a fighter and you merge them together, that's how you get a paladin. Now, with a paladin, something to keep in mind is that you are going to have to play a character that is aligned to their oath, right? So if you take an oath of vengeance, let's say, and you are like sworn to like, you know, enact vengeance, then the type of character you're playing is going to be one that is with that as their goal, right? It can feel very pigeonholey, but it can be a very good starting point if you don't know where to go. You also have Ranger. Ranger, unfortunately, is sort of a... People don't like Ranger, which makes me really sad because I like Ranger. I like a bow. But Ranger is, the bow-wielding class. They like to be in the forest, kind of like a druid, but they're not magical like a druid. They can't shapeshift, but they can get a companion, like an animal companion. But and they're very good at I'll be honest here. A lot of the traits, a lot of the things that you get in terms of skills and stuff with Ranger are things that people skip over when you actually play the game. Things like survival. Things that require you to navigate. Those are the kinds of things that Rangers are very good at. However, those are probably one of the most boring aspects and the first to get cut because, like I said before, if it's not fun, then you can just get rid of it. And unfortunately, Ranger tends to bear the brunt of that. So keep that in mind. But if you like wielding a bow, honestly, just the fantasy of being able to wield a bow can be very powerful. So that's Ranger for you. Rogue, I don't think I have to explain Rogue very well. Very much. Very classic. Dual wielding rogue, daggers, sneaking in the shadows. Now, the last two is Sorcerer and Warlock. The biggest confusion with new players is what's a Sorcerer and what's a Sorcerer, Warlock, and Wizard. Excuse me, it's the last three. Now, the biggest thing is what's the difference between these three sort of magic wielding classes, right? You have Sorcerer who does magic, you have Warlock that also does magic, and you also have Wizard who also does magic. What I would say personally is that, well, not personally, this is sort of the rules, but how I would describe it is that Sorcerer is someone who is born with magic, Warlock is someone who gets magic through capitalism, and Wizard is someone who studies to become magic. Sorcerer, you're born with it. It's part of your body. It's natural. So you're a lot of how you do magic is you have a low amount of spells, but you're a natural at them, right? It's just part of you're like Elsa from Frozen. So I would say actually Sorcerer is one of the better sort of starter options because you choose your spells, and then that's the spells you have. That's it. You don't have to worry about the spells you didn't choose once you start the game. Warlock, like I said, you talk to Daddy Capitalism, a demon, or a fae, or some form of patron that gifts you these powers. Now, you are just sort of some Joe Schmo person who can't do very much, but you were able to successfully sign a contract with someone who can be evil, most of the time is evil, or kind of neutral in terms of what they want, but it is legally binding. So let's just say that if you are a non-committal person, if you do not like commitment, you're very wary of contracts, then you would not be a Warlock. Okay. And Warlocks are great, but they kind of suffer the same problem as Clerics do, where you kind of have to find not a deity, but you have to find your patron, right? You have to find who is giving you your powers, which can be pretty fun. But if you're not if you want to not talk to your dungeon master, game master, before the game starts, that could be definitely something to keep in mind. And last is Wizard. Wizard is one where if you like having options, they're very good. But for someone who's new, I would maybe not recommend a Wizard unless you are interested in reading, because there is a lot of spells, and every time in game you decide to take a long rest, which in the game is basically just if you go to sleep for the night, you are able to switch up all of your spells. So it fits with the theme, right? Like you've studied magic, so you can cast any spell, but you have to have the correct spells prepared. You're very like forward thinking as a wizard. So it can feel a bit daunting to a new player to pick wizard and then suddenly have an entire list of spells. You can totally go for it. It's not something that I would say would be wrong. There's no wrong choice here, but wizard is definitely the wrong choice. Okay, so what is playing? Those are all the classes. So I'm going to move on to what is playing actually like, right? I'm talking all about classes. I'm talking about fighting. Like, how is this going to play out? So you're just going to be in a room with your friends. You're going to be at a table and you're going to have the dungeon master narrate this story, right? And he's going to, wow, how problematic of me. They are going to go ahead and set the scene for you so that you can go ahead and perform. So what is playing the game actually like, right? So you're going to be getting together with your friends, you're going to be at a table, and the dungeon master or game master is going to be narrating a scene or scenario for you to then perform. Now, what do I mean by that? Your dungeon master is going to be following, either written or not, they're going to have some form of like guide, right? They have a narrative that they want to take you through, right? They have a tale they want to tell you, but you are the main characters in this tale. So you will have decisions that you will have to make, scenarios that you're going to be in that you'll have to respond to in however way you want. And it's up to the dungeon master to be able to follow what you're doing and take the narrative to a place that they want it to be, right? And not necessarily sometimes dungeon masters will like really force you. Sometimes they'll let you go wherever you want, but whatever the case is, it's going to be very much that. They're going to be describing like, the very classic opening is you're at a tavern and all of the party members are there. You all meet and you're about to like start a commission, right? You're all adventurers and you're going to start a commission and you're all going to be taking on the same commission, hence why you are now teammates. But what is also interesting is that is very freeform. People can talk, they can use their skills, and the dungeon master will be basically observing you guys as you perform with each other and like sort of have fun, and only interject when you are interacting with like world objects or things in the world that they need to answer for, or if they need you to roll for something. The other thing that you need to know is that you will then encounter times where you are in combat. This is going to happen fairly frequently, but not too frequently. Combat takes a while. No one tells you this, but Dungeons and Dragons, the combat, it can be like a couple of hours for a whole combat. And that can be a little short. So combat is turn-based. Each person's going to go through their turns and they're going to do what they need to do, and then it moves on, right? So it can feel very different when you're in combat versus out of combat. Out of combat can feel like you're playing like an improv scene with your friends. Combat can feel like you're being bogged down by a lot of rules and a lot of fighting that, honestly, if someone is not very interested, they can really zone out during that moment. So it's up to the dungeon master to really make it more interesting, but it's something to keep in mind so that if you do get bored during those moments, you can then have a conversation with your friends and be like, hey, maybe we can speed this up, or hey, maybe fighting is not really for us. Maybe we should focus more on the narrative aspect instead of the combat aspect, and that's totally fine. Dungeons & Dragons is very malleable in that way. So in terms of that, I will just talk about the pitfalls here of starting Dungeons & Dragons. So with that, you have sort of your class. You have a lot of what you really need. You only really need to know like your class, what kind of character you'll be playing. And, I've put down a lot of stuff for you. You don't have to worry too much about backstories and stuff, like it can be very good, but I tend to reserve those things for people who are more interested in Dungeons and Dragons. Someone who's first starting out is not going to be, you're not going to be very, what's the right word? Motivated, let's say, to do those things because you're not sure if you're really going to enjoy it. And that's totally fair. It takes a lot of time to do that, but it can be a very good creative outlet. So pitfalls. It's a really big time waster. If you are the dungeon master, which I know you're not going to be, but if say you were ever going to be a dungeon master, it can be a lot of time to prepare, a lot of time to figure things out and to get everything ready because you are basically setting everything up for everybody. And it can also feel very draining emotionally, because you're basically putting on a performance and it can feel like work, not work, but like, it can be very draining, emotionally draining. And with that, it can suddenly, because it's a fun thing that people do. And if it gets too draining for people, suddenly people will start to drop out or they'll start canceling certain weeks. And then it can feel like it will not end because you'll never get together with your group again. So I would say only start Dungeons and Dragons with a group of people that you are totally fine never talking to again. Okay? That is my best advice. Okay, so I have everything here for you. If you wanted to take a look at it, and then we'll go over more specifics, but I think this is a good basics for you now. Okay, yeah, absolutely. Well, if that is all, then I'm happy to have served you. And, if you want our $200 dice, just let us know and I'll get it for you. Okay? Okay. I hope you have fun. Okay. Bye-bye.